Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members and guests. We're glad you're here for the second session of our TACIR meeting. I'd call your attention to the agenda for today. And our first item of business is a panel discussion on Public Chapter 497, Water Recreation's Horses. And I will ask our research manager, Jennifer Berry, to step forward and to introduce the panelists and get us started. I would suggest to our panelists, if you don't mind, that I think that sometimes we don't pull the mic as close to us, our face, as we can, and your voice is not being picked up on the recording, the audio. So please try to, speak as closely to the mic as you can, and we do appreciate your willingness to participate. But I will now turn it over to Ms. Berry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members. My name is Jennifer Berry, and in a few moments I will introduce our panelists today for our discussion. And as you might recall, the General Assembly passed Public Chapter 497, Acts of 2021, directing TACIR to study the effects of non-fish and game-related recreational activities, such as paddleboarding, canoeing, kayaking, and tubing, on Tennessee's waterways, and strategies to fund, manage, and protect water and land resources affected by these activities. We will present the draft report at the summer 2022 meeting and the final report at the December 2022 meeting. According to stakeholders that we have talked with so far, including state agencies, federal agencies, local governments, user groups, nonprofit organizations, national organizations, and agencies in other states, there has been an increase in recreational activities on Tennessee's waterways in recent years, in part because of increased use of non-motorized vessels such as canoes and kayaks. The stakeholders agree generally both that this has led to congestion and access issues, as well as conflicts between members of the public using water for recreation, and that there is a need for new strategies to manage these resources. These challenges are not unique to Tennessee, and TACIR staff is reaching out to other states to learn what they are doing to address similar issues. As an introduction to this topic, today the Commission will hear from these several stakeholders here with knowledge and experience with the issues affecting water recreation and Tennessee's waterways. And each person will have about 5 minutes for their remarks. 3 panelists, Mike Robertson, David Brown, and Jane Polanski, have PowerPoint presentations, which are in the front pocket of your docket books, I believe. And David Brown and Andrea White have provided written statements, which are behind tab 6. And I believe you also just received a few materials that Jane Polanski brought with her. Now I'd like to briefly introduce the panelists, and then I'll turn it over to the chairman. Starting with Thomas Moncrief, attorney, Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency; Mike Robertson, Director of Operations, Tennessee State Parks; David Brown, Executive Director, Tennessee Paddle Sports Association; Andrea White, Tennessee State Director with the American Canoe Association; Jane Polanski, Education and Outreach Manager with the Harpeth Conservancy; and Mike Butler, Chief Executive Officer with the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. Thank you all for being here today, and I'll just remind you all to make sure to hit the on button on your mics before you speak. The red light will be on while you're speaking. And then for the PowerPoints, David, when you're all done with your PowerPoints, just close yours out. The next one will come up, and then pass the clicker down to Jane when it's her turn to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, and members, we will hold our questions until the end of the presentations, and we will take them in the order that they are listed on the agenda. I think Attorney Moncrief, if there's no objection, we'll start there.
Thank you, Chairman Yeager, members of the Commission. My name is Thomas Moncrief. I'm the Associate General Counsel with the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. I will try to keep my remarks brief. For those of you that may not know, in 2018, the General Assembly enacted Public Chapter 969, which gave the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission the authority to promulgate rules for the purpose of regulating commercial paddlecraft outfitters. The commission voted on those rules in January of 2019, and those rules became effective in November of 2019. The rules were mostly driven to gather data from these outfitters, because at any given time, the agency did not know how many canoes or kayaks were on any given body of water. There were some other requirements, such as giving safety information to those individuals that rent canoes or kayaks from the outfitters. The first period for reporting was supposed to be in, I believe, October of 2020, but as COVID happened, we did not ask those operators to provide that information, and then, of course, that carried over into 2021 as well and impacted a lot of businesses. So at this time, we expect the first reporting data to be given to us in October of 2022. We did not institute any fees with those regulations. And as far as future action, I believe this upcoming budget cycle, the agency is requesting a budget expansion for 4 new full-time boating officers that will be dedicated to primarily enforcing these regulations for paddlecraft, working with the outfitters to ensure they have the necessary permits and reporting necessary data. And as far as that's really all. That's pretty much caught up for the agency.
All right, Mr. Robertson.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Mike Robertson. I'm the Director of Operations for Tennessee State Parks. I have the honor of being able to work for Tennessee State Parks in this role as Director of Operations since 2012, and have had the privilege of serving in Tennessee State Parks since 1980. And I started as a seasonal park attendant, seasonal interpreter, recreator, park ranger for 15 years, park manager for 9 years, area manager, and now my current role. Through those years, I've experienced the support that Tennessee State Parks has received from our legislature and the citizens, and I want to take this time to thank you for that support. It's been appreciated over the years. Tennessee State Parks were established in 1937 to manage public lands which possess natural, cultural, historic features or scenic beauty and provide aesthetic, scientific, creative, social, or other recreational values for the use and enjoyment of the people or the public that utilize our properties. Next year, believe it or not, 2022, Tennessee State Parks will be celebrating 85 years. So, and through those 85 years, we continue to meet the intent of the enabling legislation which created us in 1937. Tennessee State Parks has provided citizens and visitors alike access to our public lands and waterways so that they can enjoy the natural, cultural, historic resources that make Tennessee a special place to live, work, and play. Today, Tennessee State Park manages over 220,000 acres within 56 state parks across the state, from T.O. Fuller and Meeman Shelby State Parks in Memphis to Warriors Path State Park in Kingsport, Red Clay State Historic Park in Cleveland to Reelfoot Lake State Park in Tiptonville, and everywhere in between. Each park is established for the preservation, protection of the natural and cultural resources found within them, and to offer opportunities for quality outdoor experiences. Tennessee State Park mission is to preserve and protect in perpetuity unique examples of the natural, cultural, and scenic areas, and provide a variety of safe, quality outdoor recreational experiences through a well-planned and professionally managed system of state parks. Or as I like to say, to preserve, protect, and share our Tennessee State Parks. Tennessee State Parks has been recognized by the National Recreation and Parks Association as one of the best state park systems in the nation. And we are accredited by the Commission of Accreditation of Park and Recreation Agencies for our professional management of system of state parks. We are continually striving to improve the services we provide to our visitors and our citizens of our state, and to grow in our approach to professionally manage our Tennessee State Parks. I've been asked to serve to participate in this panel today to discuss water resources and water recreation provided within Tennessee State Parks. We have 47 of our 56 state parks that are located on lakes or reservoirs and rivers throughout the state. 22 of those are on state park managed lakes, 18 with access to reservoirs within the state, 23 with access to our state rivers, to include 2 parks that are primarily focused on access to our state scenic rivers. That's Hiawassee-Ocoee State Park and Harpeth River State Park. Tennessee State Park provides access to the public, to our Tennessee waterways through the management of public access points within our parks, to include lake and reservoir boat ramps, river put-ins and takeouts, trails along the waterways or the shorelines. Tennessee State Park also manages 4 marina operations and offers 3 additional marinas as leased operations that provide storage of watercraft and easy access for the owners of those watercraft to the waterways of the state. State Park also provides seasonal watercraft rental operations to provide the public access to john boats and pontoon boats, canoes, kayaks, paddle boats, and paddle boards for those that can't afford to own them themselves. Tennessee State Parks has enjoyed a partnership throughout its 85 years with the TDAC Division of State Natural Areas, the Departments of Agricultural Division of Forestry, and Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agencies, along with other federal and nonprofit organizations in providing public access to our public lands and waterways throughout Tennessee. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Brandt?
Thank you. I want to see.
Go ahead and move that over there.
Pardon?
Go ahead.
Slides come up here.
Yeah.
May need technical support. That's yours. Yeah. Jennifer. Is she available? Can you close yours out, maybe? That's James. I don't know. I'm next. So I'm not sure which one.
I'm confused with the issue here. I've read that. There's multiple people involved in regulating the waterways. There's a really congestion. No, I don't know.
There you go. All right. That's it. Now we view show. Slideshow. Right here.
That's what I read. That's exactly what I thought. What if I said it's all about the different.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to present our views on this issue related to paddlecraft use in the state. I represent the Tennessee Paddle Sports Association. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Started out on the Ocoee in 1980, headed up the effort to save the Ocoee during that period. So I have a long history with this issue, especially in the state of Tennessee. Our members operate on many of the waters in the state, both lakes and rivers that are available for recreational boating, kayaking. Now, this study does not include the whitewater element, as you know. So I'm going to just focus on the users related to, that are subject to the regulations and legislation that's passed. Our members represent the majority of outfitted user days for this type of activity in the state. Our hope is that this study will enable the state to accommodate, support the growth of private and commercial paddle sports, which we think is an asset to the state, and certainly an activity that deserves support. Really hasn't gotten the attention that, you know, it's grown recently in recent years, but a lot of the resources have not been adapted to accommodate the use. I'd like to go over a little bit about the state of the paddlecraft industry in the state. There are about 90 to 100 businesses offering renting canoes and kayaks to the public. About 48 of those held TWRA permits. The rest of them either didn't know about it or were unfamiliar with the process. And so we think that's going to obviously increase to a much higher percentage of participation this next year. Ironically, the greatest amount of use is at private access points or state access points with some city and counties, not TWRA. TWRA is certainly an important player, but a lot of the use occurs from private access. It's difficult for us to know at this time exactly how many user days there are for private and commercial, but if I had to guess, I would say it's over 1 million annually, private and commercial. And I think the private, non-commercial sector is actually larger than the commercial side. And I'll share some information why I came to that conclusion. Our members operate on 27 streams, 18 lakes, and use is really prominent on about 24 weekend days on about 125 miles of waterways. There's certain popular resources that are very popular, and that's where a lot of the use occurs. And of course, use is more dispersed than that around the state, but there are some rivers that have just become sort of popular, like the Harpeth, the Buffalo, the Duck, and the Caney Fork. Now, non-commercial paddlecraft use has grown more rapidly in recent years than commercial rental fleets. And actually, we're in a period of somewhat of contraction. We surveyed the entire industry, not just our members, this past year. 70% of them saw a decline in revenues this year when compared to last year. And that's in part because, there was this great demand last year because of COVID for outdoor activities. State parks saw it too. Now, ironically, because of COVID protocols and because we couldn't get any new boats, we didn't see as much growth as we would have, but it's dropped back down now to almost to 2019 levels. This year, manufacturers are not taking orders for new livery paddlecraft, so the fleets are pretty much stuck unless you can buy used boats somewhere. The supply chain disruptions have hit the industry, and I think the capacity they are using are for the retail products, which are much higher margin for the manufacturers. This slide here gives you an idea of the growth of paddle sports, paddlecraft in Ohio, where they register all canoes and kayaks, both commercial and non-commercial. The yellow line is the growth of non-commercial paddlecraft. The blue line is the growth of commercial liveries. During that 10-year period, commercial liveries only grew 52%, whereas the private paddlecraft registrations grew 284%. So you can see that if you parse out the data, you can see why I think that private paddlecraft use is actually greater than commercial use. And it's more dispersed. There are a lot more boats. They're not used as frequently, but overall, you've only got about, in the state of Tennessee, probably 10,000 boats in the commercial fleet. And in Ohio, you have 12,000. And Ohio, I've looked at the numbers. There are roughly 88 companies in Ohio. They tend to be a little larger than the companies in Tennessee. So roughly the same number of livery craft, I would think. But this trend, I think, even though the numbers may not replicate exactly to Tennessee, that you'll see these trend lines occur in Tennessee if we ever get the data on both private and commercial sector. Actually, in Ohio now, non-motorized vessel registrations exceed powerboat registrations by a significant margin. I want to talk a little bit about misconceptions. And as this slide can show you, I think you can see that the recent growth of paddlecraft businesses has not been explosive. It's been described that way, but that's not accurate. It's grown, but it's not as certainly as significant as the self-guided or private paddlecraft. You might have heard something about litter. I can tell you the rivers I've been on just about all of them. They're pristine. There's not a lot of litter coming out out of Palcraft users. You do have some when you've got, that many people, but it's not the kind of problem that you would might hear from some of the adversaries of paddle sports. And the data shows that outfitted trips are actually lower risk for beginners than
Excuse me, could you just speak into your microphone just a little bit?
Yeah, sorry about that.
No problem.
The data will show that outfitted trips are actually lower risk for beginners than self-guided trips. And this is not a criticism of self-guided users, but when you go on an outfitted trip, first, the primary thing is when the river conditions are not good for the general public, they shut down. And so you have some uninformed private users that will go out in certain conditions and perhaps not be as aware of river hazards. And this is a picture here of the Harpeth, which is an example. These are trees that fell in the river. The resident outfitters shut down on this stretch of river when this occurred until they could get the wood cut out. But the state parks did not close the river to other users. Now, there were no fatalities, fortunately, but that's kind of an example. One of the other things our people do is they help maintain boat ramps. They clean up litter, they weed whack. Those activities would not be occurring if they weren't using these ramps. So this is an example, and it's not an anomaly. Now, there are user conflicts. We recognize that. And so what are some of the solutions? Well, congestion at boat ramps. We've got these boat ramps that were designed in the 50s and 60s with one lane, everybody trying to use the same one-lane boat ramp, a 2-hour period every day, private and commercial. So it's not just commercial, but if you go to Happy Hollow, which on the Caney Fork, their cars lined up both sides of the highway for a quarter mile, and those are not commercial users, but they're all trying to get down to the boat ramp at the same time. So that's one of the problems we recognize, and this is an example of probably a user conflict between fishermen. You can see the wade fishermen there and the Palcraft users coming out of the put in, and they're probably, I just kind of jokingly say, there's probably one thing a fisherman with a fly rod hates more than seeing a paddler come down the river, and that's a river otter. He scares the fish and then eats them. But we need funding to modify some of these access points. And there's some things that can be done to reduce these user conflicts. And we need to have some changes to access points to segregate the powerboat users and the paddlecraft users. And there's money available for that. And, in my report, my full report, I cite where those funds are available. Plus, there's this infrastructure money that's available now, which I think can enhance that. The other thing that we can do is educate. We've adopted best practices so that we don't keep our boats on the boat ramps. We move off to the side, stage away from the boat ramps. We need to get those best practices, help educate private boaters on those best practices as well. And another example is this is at Happy Hollow on the Caney Fork. You see the boat ramp up on the right there. Outfitter weed whacked this area to launch boats so they're not having to use the boat ramp. So some modest improvements to a place like that would certainly help reduce the user conflicts. So I think one of our concerns is there's so many different fee authorities, including a study at the federal level now on this issue that was in the infrastructure bill that has to be done within a year to determine the user impacts of paddlecraft users on the Sport Fisheries Restoration Act. So I think we're very much interested in working with you folks moving forward, and our guiding principle is that people of good will and good faith can work together to solve user conflicts and issues without eliminating access. Thank you so much. I'll be happy to answer questions at the right time.
Thank you. Ms. White?
Hello, thank you all for allowing me to be here today. I appreciate it so much. I have put on the cover sheet of my reference document that is in your book, more or less what I'm going to cover today. I'm going to give you a tour of this reference document and just hit the highlights so that you can peruse that at your leisure. I'm happy to answer at any level of detail any questions that arise from any of the things that are here or more. My name is Andrea White. I'm a Nashville girl that grew up on the Hill with my dad, the career Capitol Hill reporter and sometimes dean of the Capitol Hill Press Corps, who is here today, so you can blame him. I've given you my contact information as well as my deputy state director, who's not here today because of a family event. I will tell you, I've included several articles that I think are important. Our press release when the Coast Guard released 2020 boating statistics, because Tennessee has a disproportionate number of paddling deaths compared to any other state in the nation. We have a disproportionate number of destination waterways. We have people coming from many other states to our state to use our waterways. And as a result, when usage goes up and incidents and fatalities also follow that trend, we have a disproportionate number of them. That is also why in 2020, according to the data collected by American Whitewater, which is more detailed than the data collected by the Coast Guard, we were tied for #1 in the country for river-related paddling fatalities. So I want you to think, every time someone talks to you about resources or access or money or fees, I want you to ask them a question about safety. I want you to ask them why people are dying on the easy water in Tennessee. In 2020, more than 2/3 of those paddling fatalities were on lakes and Class 1 rivers. There has been a training gap, and that's where our people come in, okay? There's also an article here that talks about one of our oldest organizations. I represent 9 paddling clubs across the state. I've got details on those clubs in here. They are collectively more than 315 years of citizen advocacy for our rivers and our paddlers. 5 of those organizations have been around since the 60s when they helped get the Tennessee Scenic Rivers Act passed. And one of them in particular, the one headquartered in Nashville, my home club, the Tennessee Scenic Rivers Association, it's an all-volunteer organization. They don't necessarily have the best records, but over the last 20 years, they've got the receipts to show the $80,000 that they've helped contribute to conservation-based land purchases, most of which were donated to the state of Tennessee. So paddlers have been contributing in a very real, monetized way, even when they weren't required to. And I think that it's important for you to understand that if people who might give you an argument that paddlers aren't contributing to the resource might be asking the wrong questions. Furthermore, I included an article from the Tennessean that's recent. One of our biggest user group conflicts that's happening in the state right now that is still an active situation. And that is where a fisherman on the Nolichucky River over Memorial Day weekend set a bank-to-bank trot line that caught a paddler who is actually a first responder, a professional first responder in his own right. Because of his whitewater training and his first responder situational awareness, he was able to disentangle. But that section of river has had a significant increase in tubing for kids on tubes, and this was a holiday weekend. Our national safety expert was running a class that day, saw his student get caught in this line and remove the river-wide hazard, and now he's being threatened with jail time with criminal charges. So we've got a user group conflict. And 2 years ago, we lobbied here at the state legislature and got an amendment added to a bill in 2019 to create a Palcraft advisory board with the intention to bring all the stakeholders to the table so we could address emerging issues and we could deal with user group conflicts and we could lean on our shared values of conservation and safety and find common sense solutions. That paddle board, that advisory board was passed by the legislature, but was not implemented in that way. It did not bring all the stakeholders to the table. It has not been used to address user group conflicts, and I think those are questions you might want to ask TWRA as to how they intend to use that board to address some of these issues that you're now being tasked with studying. I would very much like to have been able to use that since Memorial Day weekend to resolve the question of this trot line with my national water safety expert rather than him being in court facing criminal charges, for example. I will skip to the page where I've talked about the 2021 ACA Tennessee accomplishments. We started the year coming out of 2020 quarantine with all of the users flocking to the waterways, coming out of beautiful weather, with 15 Facebook Live broadcasts over 10 weeks to cover safety, mentorship, resource messages to these new users that didn't know where to look for answers. They were very highly attended. They've been archived on the web. We post those in all kinds of places so that people can continue to reference those resources and learn about places they can go in their community and statewide to get mentorship in paddling, to find out about destinations they might like to paddle, to get the tips and tricks on how to do that safely, and where they can get training so that they can actually advance their paddle skills and do more significant paddling without putting themselves at undue risk. In one of the things that we did in that broadcast series was do a call for instructors, for experienced paddlers that could teach on their home waterways. I organized 3 instructor classes this year. We already have more than 100 certified instructors in Tennessee, and after those 3 classes, we had 31 more. We also had a number of renewals in our instructors so that we maintained our installed base of instructors. That did not happen all the places in the country. So we did a significant proactive effort to expand the base of people offering paddle sports training in our state because we know we have a safety issue and we have some amazing waterways we want to share. So we wanted to help people address that gap in skills and training. Those were mostly done by volunteers, by the way. These are citizen volunteers that have paid money out of their pocket to go get trained as instructors and are offering their services as a service to the community. Many of these clubs will use those classes to raise money for conservation causes, but the instructors are not getting paid for this time. Before I go to the next section, I'm going to give you a little bit of insight on ACA. The American Canoe Association is one of the oldest nonprofits in the country. It was founded in 1880, and it's not a direct parallel to any of the other organizations at this table. I'm the state director of the Tennessee chapter and an elected volunteer by my peers. The organization nationally is the national governing body for several Olympic paddle sports. We are the certifying body for instructors. We are the best practices across the whole paddling ecosystem. We're not a trade association. We're not a membership organization that lobbies for member rights. We are best practices. We are a gold standard seal of approval. And that's why we need a voice at the table if you're talking about paddle sports. And it doesn't matter if it's commercial or private. We do have individual members, but we also have outfitters who are members. We have instructors that have made paddling a lifestyle and are entrepreneurs and have started businesses in the paddling world. So the ACA can be a voice for you, that can be a voice of reason at the table, that can speak to safety and best practices across the board anytime you need to ask those kinds of questions. I want to talk about the partnerships we've had with state agencies and speak to what have we done for you lately, very specifically. In May of 2021, our Chattanooga club, the Tennessee Valley Canoe Club, partnered with the state park rangers at Hiwassee-Ocoee State Park to offer low-cost Kayaking 101 classes in May. These were, I think they cost like $15, so that anybody could apply to come take this class, and certified instructors and the park rangers taught them. Later that month, several of my instructors and myself, working with TWRA, did a flatwater and Class 1 safety and rescue class with 16 TWRA wildlife officers, so that we actually did a train the trainer with the wildlife officers so that they would be better able to help the public. They know the techniques for how to climb back in a boat in deep water and all the different things that can be kind of tough to learn off the internet or just in theory. We taught them hands-on how to do it and how to talk somebody through it. And we taught them some skills in current. We did both a lake day and a river day with the tried and true national training methods that they had not been exposed to before. In June and July, the Tennessee Scenic Rivers Association built on their more than 25-year partnership with TWRA by offering volunteers to help train in their Becoming an Outdoor Woman and their Tennessee Outdoor Youth Summit events. So volunteers have been partnering with TWRA for decades to offer training in paddle sports to Tennesseans, and we continued that this year. In 2020, there's a group of folks up on the plateau that hold a race, and this is going to sound crazy to you guys. It is a whitewater race on a Class 4 creek on the plateau that happens every January, and it's because it's the only time of year it's got enough water to run. But it is destination world-class paddling. It's on Daddy's Creek. And it is a destination event for this niche of paddlers that have the skills to run this water. We have a group of volunteers that run that race every year, and it is a very well-attended event. They raised money and they made a big donation to TWRA as a result because they were very appreciative of the fact that we were given access to the Catoosa Wildlife Management Area to hold that race. And that event, I got the details of that donation, but specifically they asked that some of it be used to pay for signage so that we could improve the relationships between the hunters that use that wildlife management area and the paddlers. But they left 80% of it at TWRA's discretion as to how they wanted to spend that money. They didn't put any earmarks on it at all. So the paddlers are contributing. They're just contributing in different ways because they've never had a channel to contribute or a requirement to contribute. And I am very happy, in print what you have written here is that the initiatives are currently in the planning stages. I am happy to make this official and to make an official announcement to you today. In May of 2022, ACA Tennessee is going to build on that success of the Kayaking 101 classes at Hawaii-Ocoee last year. We are going to partner with the Tennessee State Parks, and we are going to offer Kayaking 101 classes at multiple state parks across the state as part of National Safe Boating Week in May, on May 21st. And we're tentatively scheduled to do 12 state parks. We're still going to work through the details with parks so that we get it all ironed out. But we have ACA instructors who have volunteered to be the lead instructors who are going to partner with the park rangers. We've got a lot of park rangers that have received ACA training and are ready to help. And we're going to help educate the state and do a big media campaign around the safety messages at the beginning of the paddling season. So we're stepping up here, trying to do what we can. Additionally, this one's a national thing, okay? We're working to help ACA National develop the curriculum for kayak fishermen nationally as best practices, and particularly the safety curriculum, because there has not been a safety curriculum directed directly at anglers, even though it's the fastest growing segment in paddle sports. We are going to have the beta test class for the nation at the TWRA Buffalo Ridge Refuge Facility over Memorial Day weekend. And we have the National ACA Chairman of the Board, who is one of the highest ranking safety and rescue instructors in the country, who's offered to be our lead instructor. So we are partnering with state agencies to do really innovative, proactive things to change the tide in Tennessee. And if anyone wants to say the paddlers are being lackadaisical on any of these issues, that would be inappropriate. That would be wrong. The next section of the packet gives you details on each of the 9 clubs in all parts of the state. I'm sure no matter where you are from in the state, there will be a club here that is from your area that I can put you in touch with the leaders. I would be more than happy to do that if you had questions you wanted to ask about what activities are happening in your area. We have schools and private training. We have 2 paddling schools in the state of Tennessee that are regional centers of excellence. That would be the Nolichucky Outdoor Learning Institute in Tri-Cities area, and the ACE Kayaking at Hawaii-Ocoee. They are both considered centers of excellence for paddle sports training. We have other schools that are doing the day-to-day work of just training intro-level paddlers and giving them access to the sport that we love. And I've highlighted those here. We also have a group of rescue instructors that have, ever since the flood in Nashville of 2010, have been doing, I think, something like 8 or 9 weekends a year, and by weekend I mean 3-day weekends on top of their full-time jobs and lives, training first responders and park rangers in whitewater rescue and flood stage river rescue. We've got people that are ACA instructors that are really trying to move the dial on what's happening on our waterways and what's happening safety-wise in this state. They're experts that you can call and you can talk to and you can ask questions, and I am happy to make those connections if you have questions in your area. We also have a world-class author. The Bible of whitewater paddling in the Southeast is called Whitewater of the Southern Appalachians. The author of that is Kirk Edelman. He lives in Knoxville. He teaches on the Cumberland Plateau. We have experts in this state. You don't have to guess. They're not hard to find. Furthermore, we have 5 kayak manufacturers in this state, 3 of whom are major players. Jackson Kayak in Rock Island, Piranha, the North American distribution headquarters for Piranha Kayak is in Irwin, and Lifetime Manufacturing in Knox County, which is a major manufacturer providing kayaks to Walmarts and other large big box stores across the country. Kayaks mean jobs in Tennessee. Sales of kayaks mean jobs in Tennessee. And if you want to talk about that aspect of it, we're happy to connect you with those people as well. Beyond that, I have given you a report that I had put together for Jennifer earlier this year of some of the contributions each of these volunteer organizations, these 9 clubs, have done across the state in 2021. If you have questions about what the club in your area has contributed in terms of training and mentorship to new paddlers, in terms of conservation projects, it's all detailed here. And it's pretty darn impressive, actually. If you think about, these are all things people are doing as volunteers because they love it. And they just want to be neighborly and to bring other people into the sport and into our community. It's many pages. It is hundreds and thousands of volunteer hours. And this is 1 year's worth of data. I want you to remember most of these clubs have been around for more than 50 years. They have a long history of doing these activities. This doesn't happen out of nowhere. There is a culture of volunteerism. There is a culture of conservation. There is a culture of safety in the paddling world. And yes, there has been significant growth, and a lot of that is at the entry level of the new paddlers that may not know all of those things, or they may not have been fully assimilated into the community yet. But we're working hard at it, and we are happy to partner with you guys, with the state agencies, with the nonprofits. We are happy to partner with other like-minded folks across our sector to try to make things better. We want to be at the table to help find solutions. So that's what I would end with. At the end of my first page, I've got 4 bullets that are what are our asks. What do we ask of you? What we are asking is that if you are going to regulate paddlers, please give us a seat at the table. Please don't do it to us. Please let us talk to you about how to go about it. There are good ways to do it and bad ways to do it. Boat registration is not the way you want to do it, you guys. And I can give you a very quick synopsis why. But there are ways to go about it that are constructive and productive, and you can get lots of good buy-in, and there are ways that you will not. And I'm happy to have it be an open book and have that conversation with you. We want to build solutions that make sense on a paddle sports model, okay? A paddle sports model for good public policy, not powerboat models or fishing models. It doesn't have to be a pay-to-play because it's a consumptive sport, because it's not a consumptive sport, right? It doesn't have to be a registration for a boat where in the powerboat world, a family has one powerboat, right? They spend $30,000 to $50,000 for it, and an annual registration is a fraction of the value of that boat. In the paddling world, a family has a boat for every member of the family in every type of water they paddle. It is exponentially more boats, and the value of the boats may be as low as $100. So an annual fee to register that boat is a very high percentage of the value of what that boat cost. Furthermore, I promise you, you do not want to pay a state employee to keep a database of things they sell at garage sales, okay? It doesn't make sense to do boat registration. There are better ways to go about it. So the next things I would talk about, we prioritize conservation and safety. So if you're ready to regulate private paddlers, first we need to hear somebody make that case. Nobody has made that case. Nobody has made that case to the private paddlers at all. And when we hear it, if we hear the health of the river and the health of the paddler in that case, we're going to be more responsive to that, okay? If what we hear is back maintenance on concrete boat ramps that we don't need, that's not going to be compelling. But if we hear conservation and we hear safety, that's going to be compelling. And I'll tell you that right up front. And finally, I would say paddlers have a tendency to paddle specific rivers, whether it's their home run that's in their backyard or the river that they drive at 3 hours every weekend because they love that river, right? There's specific watersheds that they emotionally invest in. So if you're going to go this route, give them a way to invest in their watershed. Give them a way to know that the money they spend is going to be invested in the water they care about. Because what's happened so far in the conversations around fees with the outfitters is that there was no tie between where the money was spent, was procured, and where it was going to be spent. And it's been a subject of much debate and much consternation. If you're going to regulate paddlers, give people an opportunity to reinvest in their watershed. They want to reinvest. There's a model with the U.S. Forest Service on the Hiwassee. The U.S. Forest Service charges us to park. And we've watched over the years as that money's been reinvested in that access point. And paddlers have no problem paying that fee. Fishermen have no problem paying that fee because they see it being reinvested in the water that they like to paddle, or the access they like to use, the place that they believe in and that they care about. Give them a way to reinvest, and they will. With that, I will turn it over to Jane, and I am open to any level of question on any of those topics. Thank you.
Ms. Polanski?
Assuming that is on. Can you hear me? Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jane Polanski. I am the Outreach and Education Program Manager for the Harpeth River Conservancy. I have a lengthy background in working with water trails, working with communities in the development and the management and maintaining of these water trails. I am currently serving as our Southeast Chapter President for the River Management Society. It is a national organization to help train and promote managers for different types of waterways, whether it be whitewater, whether it be a wild and scenic river, or whether it be public access areas and flatwater paddling places. I have served as our State Scenic Rivers Administrator. I've worked with some of you here in this room on legislation to designate 2 of our state scenic rivers and to adopt language that has significantly helped our scenic river program grow and prosper as we move forward. The Harpeth Conservancy, we are 20 years of science-based organization. We lead collaborations, we build consensus, we solve problems, and we put solutions in place to maintain and pristine areas and restore degraded areas. That's very important because we have talked a little bit about the protecting our resources, not only our water resources, but also our land resources. And I'll touch upon that in just a moment. We deal in 4 different areas: clean water protection, obviously, community engagement, science and restoration, and policy, rural protection, and land use. Our vision, of course, is clean water and healthy ecosystems for rivers championed by the people who live here. One of our biggest concerns are, what are we doing to protect our waterways? And what are we doing to ensure that the people that use our waterways are fully educated on what goes on and how they too can be a part of what we are all involved in, making sure that we have enough water, that water is available to everyone, and that the quality of that water is something that people look at and go, wow, I'm really proud to live here in Tennessee. This is awesome. I get to use these waterways, and I want to promote that, and I want to bring in other people to our state. Our 20 years of success with the organization, we have a Be River Responsible program in your package. I'll ask you to each open up your package, if you will, at this time. In your package, you have a copy of this presentation, but you also have one of our stickers, and we hope you'll use that, promote that proudly, because we encourage people to be river responsible. One thing that has not been mentioned here is the fact that many people using our waterways do not wear a life jacket. And a life jacket is really the reason people are out there enjoying these waterways today. And I would encourage you in all of our efforts today that even while we were looking at what are good practices, what are some things we can do to improve our access areas, what do we need to do about congestion, let's not lose sight of the fact that people survive accidents and risk on waterways because of a life jacket. Our Be River Responsible program also works with individuals, not just on rivers and streams, but also on lakes and also in their communities, whether it be sewer issues, things of this nature. We want to make sure that people understand the importance of our clean water in our communities. I'm going to skip over this slide pretty quickly. It just pretty much tells you why we're here today and what's been done. I will stop at this slide for just a moment. I've helped create probably 25 plus water trails across the state of Tennessee. I've worked with communities, I've worked with other agencies, and we've developed a good number of accesses, public access opportunities for individuals to access our waterways in Tennessee. I think TWRA has done an outstanding job of providing public access to our waterways. If it were not for some of the TWRA access points, people would not be able to access the river. As you and I both know, on a daily basis, there is more development along our waterways, and we have private homes that border many of our waterways, so people are having less opportunity to utilize these waterways. That's where we run into the issues that we have today with the congestion at some of these boat launch ramps. Many of our water trails and many of our outfitters across the state depend on the TWRA access points. Some people cannot afford to build these access areas, and so when these public areas are available, it's an opportunity for growth within communities. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm sure Mike and some others can provide you with that information about the economic impact that it brings to a community. When the Scenic River was designated over in East Tennessee, it brought people to that area. And so people want to get on these waterways, but they want to do it in a safe manner. And that's why it's very important that we're here today to discuss some of those things. We have hotspots on several of our waterways here in Tennessee. And those hotspots include the Caney Fork, the Harpeth River, the Pigeon River, the Buffalo, the Duck, and there are several others. These are points of emphasis that we need to start with. I encourage you, as we move forward in looking at the legislation, that it's important we address the immediate issues and prioritize those and then move on. Along many of our waterways, outfitters already have contractual agreements with an entity. For example, outside outfitters at Tennessee State Parks, they may use those access points. Private outfitters may have some kind of an agreement with TWRA or another organization or a city park or a state park in their community to access those areas. And they may even have contractual agreements with the Tennessee Valley Authority for use of those properties. Some managing entities have done an excellent job in demonstrating best management practices of how to maintain and manage what goes on their waterways. Parking is probably the biggest issue with many of our access points. There are ways to address the parking issues. The Harpeth River, I started out as the first park manager, created our first Tennessee State Park Blueway. We now have blueways at, Mike, I can't tell you how many, but at least 17 plus state parks. And it is important to balance what we do to our resource on land and on water and how that affects our communities. It seems reasonable that the outfitters do provide some kind of a daily launch data to TWRA so that TWRA can identify what's happening on our waterways, what's going on. Without research, without that data, it's tough to make decisions, correct decisions, that are going to impact all these individuals. Commercial outfitters, they do an excellent job, many do an excellent job of educating the public about wear your life jacket. There may be some strainers. Those of you that aren't familiar with that could be a felled tree across a river. And I can assure you, on a flat water river or stream, when that strainer is there, it is as much a risk as a Class 4 rapid on a whitewater situation. And we have a lot of individuals that, especially during COVID or during the COVID period, who have purchased boats and just gone out on the river without any knowledge, any experience, any information at all. And they have no idea at how risky it can be. What do you do if you fall out of a boat? Folks that getting on the waterway, they don't think about that. They just think there's a waterway, there's fun, we all become 2-year-olds. We're going to get out there, we're going to have a great time. But when something happens, how do you handle it? That's why the education aspect of this is so very important. As for fees, whether it be registration, boat registration, whether it be charging individuals to use waterways, which that is already occurring, Harpeth Conservancy supports funneling any future fees back to the use area, and that's very important. Many of you that are mayors sitting here today in this room, you know how important it is to bring those dollars back to your community. And I think it's very important that as we move forward in this process, there will be administrative fees when we start looking at boat registrations and when we start charging outfitters a fee for their operation. Where does that money go? That money belongs in those communities that are being impacted by the users in that community. And in fairness, it makes sense that only vessels exempt from fees would be those such as those used for law enforcement, search and rescue, medical emergencies, state and regulatory research projects. They should be exempt from any fees because those are the people that are doing the job to protect the public. Many people here today have expressed a lot of concerns on the waterways. And I just want to reiterate 4 very important points regarding this panel discussion. Standards for recreational non-motorized watercraft and user and outfitters, long overdue. There are many outfitters out there in the community that do an excellent job with education. They provide guided trips for individuals. They take school children out on the waters. My caution to you is that we have a number of individuals who are young, inexperienced, and just get out there on their own. In a boat they've never been in before. Some of them don't know the front from the back. I've paddled down the Tennessee River watching a group struggle as they're paddling and politely just said, let's pull over to the side and how about you sit here, you sit there, and we'll turn the boat this way and see how that works. And they were like, oh my gosh, a light bulb went off. It's so easy to paddle now.
ACA instructor.
And so these are some of the things that I think need to be addressed here, is not just how do we deal with the outfitters, but how do we deal with the general public? What are we doing to get the message out to the masses of people that do not have the luxury of going through a commercial outfitter? TWRA has already implemented rules and regulations governing permit and access fees for outfitters. There's no fee being charged right now for the permit to outfitters, and that's good. And the reason I'm saying that is because before any fees should be collected, we believe that the structure should be in place. And we believe that that structure will be designed to identify what funds will be collected, who will have oversight of the funds that are collected, how those funds will be directed back to the area where they were collected. Who's going to house those funds? Is it going to be the Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency, who is overseeing all of the accesses across the state and has the responsibility of protecting people on all of our waterways? Or do we want to put it in the hands of another agency, maybe the Tennessee Department of Tourist Development. There's a lot of economic impact going on here, and we also want to understand that the TWRA, I don't know if the agency has the manpower, the will, or the desire to take on the administrative task that will be involved with organizing and administering this type of program. You heard earlier from Andrea, you've heard earlier from some others, from David, about what it takes to administer this type of program. It's a lot, and TWRA is doing an outstanding job on our waterways right now. It's hard to put a fee out there and say the fee is going to solve all of our problems. The fees, or we do need funding, whether it be through fees, whether it be through allocations in other forms or fashions. We need that money to do studies on our waterways. We need to identify what are the areas of greatest concern and how can we correct or minimize the congestion or the user conflicts or whatever else may grow out of this down the road. In Tennessee, we're on the tip of the iceberg of what other states are experiencing across the country. There are numerous states that have upwards of 1,000 people on a small stretch of river every single day and every weekend. And how do you manage that? So we're just at the tip of the iceberg. Yes, we do have congestion issues. Yes, we do have some conflicts between anglers and paddlers. As it was mentioned earlier, there's not a lot of litter on our waterways. We're very fortunate in that respect. But I also want to point out that we need to jump at this as quickly as we possibly can and take steps now so that we keep our rivers off of those 303D lists. And those are the polluted water rivers. We need to ensure that we keep the numbers down and hopefully eliminate the deaths on the waterways in our state. To collect these monies, we suggest that a trust be established for each of the waterways that where the studies may take place, or that or where fees are being collected. I can't speak enough about the recreational studies. As you know, without the sufficient information, it'd be difficult at best to put rules and regulations in place about something we have no idea is going on. So I think it's very important that we reach out and look at all the resources available to make it possible to study some of our recreational waters. You'll notice I've listed a couple of agencies that could help. The River Management Leadership Program at University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. This is a golden opportunity for young river managers to do some research and to get their first taste of what am I going to get into when I get out of here after my degree. University of Tennessee Knoxville School of Architectural Design. I'm one of the founding members of the Tennessee Riverline Project. Very proud of that. Many communities across the state of Tennessee are part of that program. And it is designed to provide public access within those communities to their waterways. There are students that have talents and ideas beyond anything we can even think of. They think about the future. MTSU, their water resource program. Austin Peay State University. They are some of the finest experts in resource management. Let's talk a little bit about collaboration and partnerships. It doesn't just start with watershed organization or nonprofits across our state. It includes our outfitters. A lot of these outfitters are maintaining those access points that they use. Some of them are not theirs. Some of them may belong to the Tennessee Valley Authority. Some of those access points may belong to the Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency. Some of those access points may belong to, may involve marina individuals. These outfitters are helping and working collaboratively with those individuals to maintain those sites, to keep them in good shape. One thing I will caution is that we need to keep a handle on what goes on lands. I'm a former state park employee, so I completely understand when somebody comes onto the property and says, well, you know, I didn't like using that access ramp, so I just started putting it over here. That can do significant damage to the resource. It can create erosion and sedimentation problems. It can create new paths. It can create the perception that it's okay for me to put in anywhere I want to put in. So it's not just on the waterways that we need to be concerned about. We need to be concerned about the waterway and the surrounding properties along those waterways. There are many groups that are working, as Andrea stated, there are many groups that are working with communities to provide fishing tournaments, to provide boating educational opportunities for people in those communities. Bring your private boat. Let us help you learn how to use that boat safely. Oh, by the way, have you read the signage at this access point? Probably not. I think the last thing people want to do when they hit the water is read a sign. But at the very minimum, I think it's extremely important that people understand where they are and where they're going. So at a minimum, every access point should have some signage that says, you are here. The next takeout is 3 miles down. The next takeout is 7 miles down. This is your last takeout before you hit water that is no longer a part of this water trail or has not been looked at upon. On our lakes, we have water trails established on our lakes. We have them over on the Tennessee River. We have them on Timms Ford. We have them, many different lakes across our state. Reelfoot Lake is another, where people get out on the waterways, they don't know where they're going. And I would challenge anybody in this room, if you've never been in a whitewater raft, get your experience early on and paddle up the Ghost River over in West Tennessee. People look at that river and go, it's a West Tennessee river, what can happen? I can assure you I've been on that waterway, and I don't go out there with somebody who knows the water. Every turn looks the same. I could be out there for hours trying to find my way home if the trail were not marked and were not well maintained, and if I did not have somebody to at least give me the first shot at showing me, about that waterway. I think it's important, as I mentioned, that we do establish an advisory board to assist the Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency in the process of moving forward with non-motorized waterway vessels on all aspects. I think it's very important that we start these river studies as quickly as we possibly can for the safety of the individuals using those waterways, to prevent any further conflicts between users, to identify how can we educate the masses of people that are using these waterways, not just reach to those individuals who are already in the audience, captive audience of commercial outfitters. And I encourage you to continue to the Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency continue to develop guidelines and standards regarding the paddling community. It's very important. The chapter has already been written regarding outfitters. The next chapter involves everybody else. We cannot stop here. We need to continue on. We need to make sure that we are protecting the individuals, all individuals that are utilizing our waterways. Our waterways are the greatest public access I think we have in the state of Tennessee. One of the happiest days I think I've ever had was building an access on the Harpeth River. At the end of the day, I was so tired. I was just worn out completely. It was close to closing time. Car pulled up, and I didn't know that many people could pull out of a car. But a family came out, ran straight to the water, and I thought, okay, it's closing time. And all of a sudden, I heard the giggles of those kids and their mom and dads splashing around in that water, having the time of their life. And I thought, you know, this is really what it's all about. This is what makes our state so great, is that people have opportunities to enjoy the resources that it's all of our responsibilities to take care of. That man came up to me and said, "Ma'am, I know it's late. I know we need to leave. Do you mind if we just stay for 5 or 10 minutes? No, sir. Enjoy your time." And that's how we need to treat the people in our state. I will also turn your attention now to a handout that I gave you. And those of you in the audience, if you would like one, we have these available for you. Permit and fee structures. Here you have a list of resources. And I've done my homework.
We need to draw to a conclusion, if you don't
Okay.
mind, ma'am.
I want you to know that these permits and fee structures, a lot of these will help you in identifying, do we really want to do permits and fees? Or how can we do permits and fees? Community partnerships around the river. If you get an opportunity to look at the Word link, please do that. It'll show you what we're going to be faced with if we don't take action now. Included in here is a whole series of river training videos. It discusses everything that we're talking about today. On available grants, I don't want to leave off the opportunities for some of our studies on our rivers. There's a Rivers Trails Conservation Assistance Program through the National Park Service. They provide technical assistance, and it doesn't cost anything to get some of these studies done. We can use these as well as some of the university resources. The others are just examples of the types of money that are available, the type of funds that are available to construct these river access areas. And I threw in an example of a written proposal so that you understand the length and depth it takes to build an access. User capacity studies, we only have one in the state of Tennessee. And that was done back in 2013, and it was on whitewater rafting. We don't have a study on our flat waters and our lakes in Tennessee. Tennessee rules and regulations, as I mentioned earlier, we just need to continue on and move forward in our process. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mike Butler.
Mr. Butler, you're next.
Well, I'm going to try to kind of shape my comments not to be redundant. It's good to be before you again, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having us over. Director Lippard, good to see you. I'd like to start by framing up the idea that Tennessee is blessed with an abundance of freshwater resources. We are the single most biologically diverse inland state in the United States. We have more species of fish in one river, the Duck River, for example, than all of Europe. There are wildlife critters that live in the river, on the Duck River, for example, that only occur there on the globe. So this is the resource that we have that we're talking about. It's a fantastic resource, and I want to echo what Ms. Polanski said, in that This is not just a recreational use issue, it's a resource conservation and management issue, because you can love things to death. And I think we all hear the stories about the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and what happens there. And so I would frame that starting with, that's the resource we're talking about. And I would move quickly to say, over the last 10 years, we have experienced a boom in paddlecraft use across the state. It did not used to be what it is now. And let me say, that's a good thing. We're getting a lot of people outdoors, And getting people outdoors is good for the state. It's good for our health. It's good for our mental health. It's good for our well-being. But there are some real challenges that are coming up with that reality. At that point, I want to recognize Ms. White's organization and the member organizations, because they are doing the lion's share of what is being done through their volunteer efforts around safety. It is, she is exactly right about their focus on safety and their ability to put safety in the forefront. What I think you're going to hear me talk about is that despite all of that hard work and all of that great work, it's not to the scale and scope that we feel needs to be taking place to address the challenges with the pressure we're seeing on some of these resources. So across the state, several of you heard about some rivers that have been mentioned here, and I'll repeat a couple of them, but some of them hadn't been mentioned. And I'm going to say this is bigger than just canoes and kayaks. It also includes inner tubes and paddle boards in some cases. The Little River in Townsend, Tennessee, if you talk to the mayor of Townsend, he's ripping his hair out because of how many people are on inner tubes floating down the river and how that creates serious conflicts that I'm going to touch on here in a second. The Nolichucky in East Tennessee is one that's been in the news lately. The Caney Fork, you've heard mentioned, the Harpeth, the Duck, the Piney in Middle Tennessee. I mean, we have some real stark. I could fill this room with people that would testify to some of the issues they're having as private landowners with trespass, criminal trespass on some of these rivers, where they're watching families come onto their properties, picnic, leave all their trash behind, including dirty diapers, and then get in their boats and float off. That's happening right now and has been for quite some time. It's not new. The types of problems that we're seeing, and I'm going to touch on this just a little bit to give a little bit more specificity to it. We do have direct conflicts with anglers. And when I say direct conflicts, I'm talking about people fishing in a wadable river and being run over by kayaks. Now, are these people malintended? No, they're not. They're great people. They're out there trying to enjoy the river. A lot of times they're not adequately trained. I think that's been documented well here. But to a large extent, it's a sheer volume issue on some of these areas. For instance, the Caney Fork you heard is a hot spot. What most of you may not realize is that the upper part of the Caney Fork, that first 7 miles, is the only wadable trout fishing water from the Smoky Mountains to Arkansas to the Cumberland River in Kentucky. And so if that's the only place you're going to go wade fish for trout, because you can't fish it when they're generating out of the dam, then you are putting a bullseye on an area and asking for conflict. The second thing is fishing guides trying to access and use traditional well-known fishing areas. We have guides, if they were here, they would testify to you that they have lost 60 to 80% of the clients they used to take on the river. In the mid-2000s, the Caney Fork was in the top 5 of all trout fishing rivers in the United States. It is no longer that way. Now, part of that is because of the impact that rebuilding the dam had and reduced the fishery and its quality. That is starting to slowly recover, and we're working with the Corps of Engineers on that. The other part, though, is the sheer volume of paddlecraft being put on that river by commercial operators largely, from our experience. You have long wait times at public ramps. These are ramps designed for public use with the Corps of Engineers, places like that. Those are kinds of problems that we're going to talk about some solutions here in just a second. Loss of public parking. When you have big commercial outfitters running large buses, they don't take up one parking spot. The public taxpayers have paid for these parking areas through their taxes with the Corps of Engineers, for example, and they have a hard time accessing that. Regular and serious impacts from criminal trespass. I don't want to spend too much time here, but there are direct and several problems. On the Harpeth a few years ago, you may remember that an elderly gentleman was put in the hospital and the people that were floating the river were prosecuted for assault. And they were folks that had rented a canoe and went down the Harpeth. That's a minority of the groups. I want to be clear. We do not feel that that represents the large segment of people trying to paddle. The problem is we don't have the resources to enforce the laws on our rivers to the scale that these types of impacts are creating. And I'll get to that in a little bit more detail in a second. There is excessive littering. Last time I was before you, we were talking about litter. I can tell you, rivers are highways for litter to go to our reservoirs. If you don't believe me, put a litter boom in front of the outlet of a creek and see what you collect in about 3 days. It'll blow your mind. It is a serious issue. We still contend that it's a major issue in the state of Tennessee. And we have seen a documented significant increase in river rescues. River rescues by both professional river rescuers at county levels, that you can look at the documents, and anecdotally as well from people that are skilled paddlers that are some of Andrea's members, some of our supporters that are seeing one of my board members rescued a 70-year-old woman that was caught under a tree at a high water event on the Kayaking. And so these things, I don't want to, I want to make sure that we're clear about these are real problems and they're occurring at more than just one or two places. They're not occurring over the length of all these rivers. But they are occurring in, as Ms. Polanski said, in certain hotspots. So that gives us hope, too, that we can address this and come together and find solutions that should be workable. Now, these types of problems we're starting to see these problems start to grow on the Elk River here in Middle Tennessee, on the South Holston, and on the Watauga and Upper East Tennessee, which are fantastic trout fishing rivers, as well as the Wolf River that Ms. Polanski mentioned. That's a highly popular canoeing river. I would encourage you to go see that. Now, the reality is, to scale, there's one group of individuals that are paying the bills for law enforcement on our rivers and for the accesses that TWRA manages and puts in. And to be clear, TWRA doesn't manage all the accesses. TVA does some, the Corps of Engineers does some, State Parks does some. But anglers are the only ones paying a user pay fee into the system as a broad payment to help manage the challenges around specifically like law enforcement. You heard Mr. Moncrief mention they're making a budget expansion request to add 4 law enforcement people. Well, those dollars aren't coming from the general treasury of the state of Tennessee. Those are coming from the sportsmen of Tennessee that are spending those dollars. And so I just want to clarify that. Again, our organization doesn't have the capacity to solve this problem on our own through volunteerism. Even working with Harper Conservancy or the Canoe Association, we don't have the resources to address this at scale. And I think that's really important to understand. This problem is big, and it's only going to get bigger. It's a good problem to have, but if we're not serious about getting to solutions, we're going to be pulling more people out of our rivers because of our failure to lead on the issue. And that's a sad thing we don't want to see happen. Now, to kind of wrap up, we have created an organization, a coalition, if you will, called Share Our Rivers. Because in the greatest sense, our goal as an organization is that any user of a river should have a reasonable expectation to be able to go out and have a quality experience on our waters in Tennessee. And you heard Ms. Polanski talk about the balance that is needed. Sharing means that no one group gets to dominate over another group. We're taught that in grade school, and we think that that's really important moving forward here, and we're committed to doing that. Ms. White and I were talking before the meeting started, and we're going to sit down and really start looking at kinds of solutions that are low-hanging fruit, but we need the help of TACIR and the legislature probably to help solve this, because some of these things are not going to be solvable just on the short term. And so if we want to look at solutions, here are some of our opinions on solutions. First, user pays. It's our official position that if you're going to use the resource, you need to pay something. You need to be contributing to the maintenance. It is the story of conservation in this country. It is the backbone of why we've recovered our fish and wildlife. In 1937, the sportsmen of this country came together in the conservation movement and said, we're going to pay for the restoration of wildlife, and we have done that to a large extent across our country. In the 50s, it was the Wallet-Brough Act, and that handled the fisheries side, or Dingell-Johnson, excuse me. In the late 80s, it was the Wallet-Brough expansion of Dingell-Johnson, which added boating, and that's when TWRA started the boating program. These are excise taxes collected on sportsmen at the federal level that come back to the states that are put into play to help manage boating and things like that. The second solution, individual specific river management plans. There are no river management plans to speak of in this state, especially around outdoor recreation. They don't exist, with the exception maybe of the Ocoee. The Ocoee has figured out how to do it. It took a long time and a lot of effort, but they have a fee-based structure, they have a use-based structure, and it works. It drives a ton of business to the Ocoee, and they get along, and they figured out how to do it. We can learn a lot from that example and put that in play. But I would say this. You heard these other folks say we're not the only ones that have dealt with this, to the point that the American Rivers Association put a guide to sustainable river recreation management planning. It's out there. Somebody wrote the book. It's right here in my hand. And I think that we can really put that together and move as a collective community to try to use that. Lastly, we're going to need full cooperation from all the commercial paddlecraft operators, and I was glad to hear Mr. Brown talk about the fact that a lot of them have registered, and it's understanding why the delay has happened. We're not happy about the delay in collecting the data because we believe, as you've heard others say, you can't make decisions on what you're going to do without sound data. First step, we have to get this data in the door. And I was glad to hear Mr. Moncrief talk about the fact that 2022 should get us there. And I think the agency has shown great discretion in making sure that their new constituent and commercial paddlecraft have been treated fairly in that approach. You know, we agreed to not pursue fees until we have data on the table to look and make decisions. It's got to be smart. We tend to agree that it needs to go back to the resource. That's what happens with hunter and fisherman dollars. It goes back to the resource. That's why the user pay model works. And so that's why you'll see us continue to support that. Now, these are all solutions that, if implemented, we hope would move us towards that goal of any user coming into Tennessee of our waters would have a reasonable expectation. And you know, we think that that's really the critical point here. If we don't have healthy natural resources, and if we don't have a situation that is a quality experience, we will not have return customers over the long term. That's what will happen. That's what's happened in other places. That's what's happened to some of our fishing guides and hotspots already, and fishing shops that have been impacted negatively because there isn't any management strategy around these. And with that, I will conclude my remarks, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Butler and panelists. Do we have any questions for our panelists or comments? Do we have any questions? Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As just a little bit of background, the town of Louisville's northern border is the Fort Loudon Reservoir of the Tennessee River. So we have several miles of shoreline. We have 5 boat launches, boat access areas, which is a lot for a smaller community like ours. 2 of which the town maintains, 1 the county maintains through the park, and we have 2 that are TWRA access areas. So water recreation is important to us. It's part of our DNA. It's part of our culture and who we are. So this is a topic of significant interest to me and others in our area. I appreciate Mr. Butler, you speaking about the litter issue. We talked about that last meeting, and I listened with a little bit of interest as I heard people say we don't have a litter problem on our reservoirs and rivers because that's not been our experience. One of the challenges we face, particularly in a community where we have the access areas, is what I would call misuse of those areas. People that use them, that litter, the leave no trace doesn't always work in our access areas. And we have an issue, we have to spend considerable time and resources maintaining our two and keeping our two boat launches clean and maintained and mowed so that you can have access. The county does the same. But one of our issues are the TWRA launch areas. And I've had discussions, Mr. Moncrief, about that. And what I'm told is the mandate or the mission of the TWRA is to promote hunting, fishing, and boating, but not necessarily litter or public parks or other public recreation areas. Would you agree with that assessment of the mandate of TWRA?
The statutory charge of the TWRA is to manage the wildlife and natural resource for the benefit of Tennessee citizens and its visitors. So if there were wildlife on a public park, then that would fall under our purview. But in terms of litter and stream cleanup, we grant several $1,000s per year to various organizations for stream cleanup. I believe the Harpeth Conservancy may be one, American River Association, Keep Cott County Clean, various ones specifically for stream cleanup. And if litter were to become an issue on a river to the detriment of the wildlife, then yes, I believe we would be involved in helping clean that up. But as a general charge, no, sir, it is. I don't believe it is.
One of the challenges we have is that you can build, and you all have done a nice job of creating parking and access and nice big white boat ramps, but there's no trash cans. There's no regular trash collection, or there's no maintenance other than maybe once a year somebody's contracted to come in and mow a little bit. And so those areas tend to become trash hotspots, litter hotspots, and eyesores. Is there anything that TWRA can do as part of its mandate or its mission to try to devote more attention to being a good steward of the areas that TWRA manages so that we can improve on that situation?
Well, I appreciate that you bring that to my attention. I've not heard of any trash issues of any of our boat ramps previously. In terms of what we can do, off the top of my head, I don't know exactly who to direct you to, but I can surely go back to our officers and our director and see what can be done.
Again, I've got some history in this area. We had one of our town cleanup days, and I went down and led the cleanup effort at the Georges Creek Wildlife, or the TWRA access area, and we probably picked up several hundred bottles and cans, hundreds of plastic sacks, hundreds of the plastic bait containers, even drug paraphernalia, because the area is overgrown and it's easy access to the Pellissippi Parkways that becomes a gathering area for that conduct. Condoms, even underwear. How you go to the lake, it must be a hell of a party. You go to the lake and you come home without your underwear. And when I reached out to TWRA, what I was told is that's, like I said, I guess they had a good time. But I'm not sure. It's frustrating on our end because we want to take pride in what our community looks like. We make the effort and expend the monies to provide trash collection and to keep the access areas that we have control over clean, and yet, right as you come into town, one of the big access areas off of Topside Road there at Pellissippi Parkway is TWR area that if, in all candor, if it was private property, we probably could successfully have it declared a nuisance. And so that's frustrating, and I'm just curious what we can do. How can local governments better partner with the state of Tennessee so we can work to make these areas clean and attractive, not just to our residents, but many of our users come from outside of Louisville because of our access to the interstates and the highways. So what can we do to better enable that cooperation and partnership?
Again, I appreciate you bringing my attention. It's the first I'm hearing of it. I'm not sure who you spoke with at the agency. I'd be curious later to get with you to find out who that was. But you can always, I'll give you my information. You can call me, or you can call Deputy Director Chris Richardson. But again, like I said, it's the first I'm hearing about it. So it's disheartening for sure, but I appreciate you bringing it to my attention. I'm happy to work with you and try and get that cooperation going.
Okay, I appreciate that, because it is frustrating to basically have a state agency say that's not within our mandate, you know. So the other issue we have in our county, and I appreciate Mr. Butler you bringing up Townsend, because if my friend the Townsend Mayor Mike Talley was here, he could give you an earful about access on the Little River and tubing. On a good summer hot day, there's not anything going on a Little River except people with their tubes, and many of them dragging their cooler behind with their Budweiser in it. It's, again, another good way to have a party on the river. But what can we do, right? Because the property owners are irritated. You know, they don't like looking out their back window at the beautiful Little River and seeing somebody urinating or somebody, you know, leaving behind their trash. It gets old picking up other people's trash on your property. So what can we do at the state level and at the local level to try to better maintain and regulate and control uses like we're seeing on the Little River in Blount County?
Our perspective, our opinion would be, you have a lot of different people that are stakeholders. You have the business operators that have a vested and right to be at the table. You have the landowners that have the same. You have other recreational users that are not necessarily being able to use that property at the time or use that water. And so that is why the management planning process around a river like the Little River would be a smart way, in our opinion, to go. It's going to require some leadership out of either local government or TWRA, or a combination of those. We know TWRA is given a verbal nod to individual river management plans around recreation. But I think you would need to get that community to the table, and the folks that are in that community to the table, bring them together and work through that process. And it's that document, I'll give you this document that I brought, that is the American Rivers Association's planning document. And it lays out that approach. Bring the stakeholders together, find out what's going to be the approach that solves the problems. You have to identify them all. You have to work through that. And everybody's going to have to give something. I mean, we hear a lot of times in public policy development that if everybody's mad about it, then it's probably the right solution, because nobody really got everything, that would impinge on another's rights or privileges. I think that's what you're going to have to get to at the Little River, from what I've heard from the mayor up there.
Does the legislature need to enact some enabling legislation so that these individual river plans can be part of the state's approach to handling, or do you believe existing legislation is sufficient?
I would reserve the right to return to that idea, but I think there could be existing authority. I'd like to talk to our friends at TDEC. They have the legislative mandate for recreation. TWRA has the mandate for commercial use on paddlecraft and things like that. I think that we'd want to do an analysis to see if there's a fairly straightforward way through before going to a legislative solution, but it may require it.
Similar question, you spoke about the importance of user fees from the perspective of your organization. If, for example, a community like Townsend wished to put in a user fee as a way to regulate and to help pay for some of the damage and impacts of the significant use, is that something that the state legislature would have to enable, or do you believe there's existing ability? Because there's some question about if they wanted to do that, right? To say, you're going to charge $35 or whatever it is to lease that tube. You're going to haul them to the drop-off. You're going to come back later and pick them up at the pickup point, but you're not going to have it. You're not going to be with them. that those people ought to each pay an individual user fee.
I
Is
would-
that something that we can do under existing legislative structures that the legislature need to address?
I'm going to ask Mr. Moncrief to chime in on this because he is an attorney and I am not, and he would know the state law better than I do. I will tell you this. One of the models that has seemed to work, I don't know if y'all remember this, in the late 90s, TVA lost their federal appropriation for non-power functions. It was to the tune of $100 million. And that precipitated a series of events around TVA access points where they started having to shut them down because they weren't going to carry $100 million on the rates, on the backs of the electric ratepayers to do that. And what they came up with was a model where they engaged concessionaires. And those concessionaires operate these access points for them. Now, I would think that it would be probably, if you have an area that's not heavily used, it's going to be hard for a concessionaire to get excited about operating that. But I can tell you, I use one of these accesses at Sail Creek on Chickamauga Lake. And there's an annual fee you can pay or a daily fee, and everybody pays it, whether you're a pleasure boater. To launch a boat, you can park it there. There's a person on site. Your cars don't get broken into. The trash is taken care of. But they took a public-private partnership approach to that on the TVA thing. So I think there are innovative ideas like that are worth exploring.
Mr. Moncrief, did you want to comment? And then we're going to go to Mr. Clifton, who's waiting for the floor.
If Mr. Bickers could, or Mayor Bickers, please repeat the question that Mr. Butler would like me to address.
Just briefly, if a community such as Townsend wanted to enact user fees for the people, for example, renting the tubes, is that something that would be allowed under existing legislation, or would the legislature need to address to give that specific authority to local government?
Are you referring to a fee that the town would charge for people using the city's own access, or also using TWRA's access or TVA's access?
It would be state access or other access. It would be a fee that simply gets charged on top of that the city would charge on top of whatever the fee the tube renter charges.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure the legality of such a fee, unless it was termed in like maybe added on to additional sales tax, which would be under the state legislature, I would think, to some extent. I'm not sure.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing my questions, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Clifton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tennessee is certainly blessed with water resources, incredible water resources. The issues and opportunities that we're talking about today are certainly not unique to Tennessee. So I'm curious, and one of the presentations mentioned the state of Ohio, but what other states are most comparable to Tennessee with regard to the resources that we have and the numbers of users that we have? What other states are we looking to for comparison?
Yes,
sir. Virginia is similar, I think, and Kentucky. Ohio's a little different. It's got 11 million people, whereas Tennessee has about 6.5. So it's a different, little different venue. But it's not unusual. I mean, the same types of activities for commercial paddlecraft occur in Ohio. The companies are actually bigger there than they are here, significantly larger.
So I guess the second part of that, and whoever wants to answer, are we reaching out to other states? And if so, what are they doing? And I guess that's a figurative question, but are we doing that? And
somebody want to jump on that?
Thank you. Yes, sir, Mr. Clifton. There's a woman that works at the agency in our boating division. Her name's Betsy Woods. She's pretty much our expert on all things boating safety. As I understand, she's reached out to other states and helping implement these regulations. Our Colonel, Darren Ryder, has reached out to other states to see how they're enforcing and regulating paddlecraft operations. So, yes, sir, we're reaching out to them. And they're one of the states you brought up, Ohio, it's one we've looked at, especially if there's any sort of fee, because it's kind of interesting. They have a hybrid system. I believe as Ms. Weiss talked about not wanting to do registration. They have, in Ohio, you can register your boat or your paddlecraft, or if you have multiple vessels that you don't want to pay a fee for each one, you can buy a boating or paddlecraft license. Because if you register so at least in Tennessee, and as I believe in other states, boating is funded primarily through boat registration fees and the federal dollars associated with those. So in Tennessee, we only register motorized boats, and we receive federal dollars for each one registered. So in Ohio, if you registered your paddlecraft, you would get federal dollars associated with that. If you don't, and you choose the paddlecraft license or whatever, I forget what Ohio calls it, then the state generates revenue from that fee. So it kind of offsets, and that way, someone who has, as Ms. White said, a family that has several craft can just buy a license for each operator, and that may save them money. I hope that answers your question.
Mr. Clifton, I would add to Mr. Moncrief, we've looked pretty heavily at the Current River in Missouri. It's a National Wild and Scenic River. It has an actual specific management plan that guides the use on that. I've actually fished that river myself several times. There are certain areas that are designated for commercial operation, individual operation, but if you're a fisherman, you can get above those, and you can go fish, and you're uninterrupted. So that they are balanced and allowed for that use in different areas, and there are a lot of different ways you can approach that. We have a list of rivers that we've examined, I think 4 or 5 that have similar management plans. I'll be glad to share with you after. I don't have them off the top of my head. One of them's in South Carolina, I believe one's in Georgia, and we've been doing some digging down into that because, again, especially out west, when you look at Colorado and some of the rivers out there they have and the pressure there's some great examples, and we can learn a ton from them on how to handle these challenges. And not to mention our own Ocoee.
Mayor, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think if we continue this discussion to this degree, particularly when it comes to litter, I attended the Keep Tennessee Beautiful annual meeting, well, the last couple of times, and of course the Tennessee River group that collecting tons, literally tons and tons of litter off that is an example of the public-private. So I think there are people who can give us some real good options in addition to the ones that have been mentioned here today. And that's what I would hope that our staff would, I know we had some of them when we had the litter discussion with us, but there is a lot of work already going on about that in TDEC and in the, trying to get visitors to come, I can't even think what that's called. Yes.
Mayor, I might add on to that and to Mayor Bicker's comments earlier, just to say that when you're dealing with litter at the waterway and at the access points, there are some topographical concerns. As you all know, we're having an increase in flood stage events. And if you put a dumpster at a river access, at a flood stage event, that becomes a dumpster in the river. So depending on the topography of your access, you may have the ability to have a place for trash pickup that a community collaboration could manage, right? But if you have topography for low-lying areas and on a frequently flooded river, that's not really a realistic option. And that comes back to, we have existing litter laws, but law enforcement, and I don't mean to pick on any particular agency, it's not cool for a law enforcement officer to enforce litter laws. They don't think it's cool. They don't want to think it's a good use of their time. It may be something that in particular communities at particular locations, we need to look at enforcing existing laws. Because
but wouldn't that be a perfect place to have garbage containers that float, so that just like the docks that move, the containers move along with them, right?
Yeah. I'm certainly open to scientific solutions. I'm not trying to put more garbage in the river, though.
I would add this, Mayor. We came across one example in a western river where, and this is maybe in more than one place, when you get on that river, they actually look in your cooler and they count the number of drinks in your cooler. Mm-hmm. And if you don't come off the river with that number of drinks, you pay a fine for every container that's not in there. Now that's a pretty strong type of thing, and that's not something we're proposing. But that would get people's attention. I'll say it that way.
I think Mayor Bradshaw is waiting for the floor. Mayor, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As everything that we've sat here and talked about this morning is a direct relation for Loudoun County. Of course, we have hundreds of acres of waterways. Of course, TRDA, Telco Reservoir Development Agency. We work hand in hand with the TWRA as far as our docks and everything, and our ramps. You know, we have several retirement communities. We've went from maybe see a kayak here and there to that's all you see now. And so as moving forward, and I'll be very brief, I would implore and certainly encourage and invite everyone to come and see how, because, you know, we've got so many groups that take part. We're very much a perfect storm, from our watershed association to Telco Reservoir to, of course, we're very lucky we have a lot of wealthy retirees, and one thing about it, most wealthy retirees are not dumb, because most dumb people aren't rich. So we have a lot of resources, and so we, I meant no offense by that if I offended anybody, but I would, anytime you all want to come in, I would welcome it. I'd love to set it up, sit down with TRDA, and like I said, we have a great relationships and great resources. Our pattern may not be for everybody, but it may get something going, and anytime y'all would like to set that up, I'd be more than glad to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. Mayor Frank, I believe you've asked for the floor. Mayor, you're recognized, Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. One, it seems like in just listening to all the panelists, and thank you all, you've done an excellent job. We have overlapping regulation. We have overlapping ways of funding. Do you all believe there is sufficient collaboration on a division of duties, or do we need to do more work on, for instance, does it make more sense for TDEC, for instance, to manage the ramps? And it's obviously a completely separate issue for enforcing behavior on the waterways. When I look at, for instance, at a community level in local parks, we're not charging a user fee to go swing, you know, take your child to swing on a swing. We're taking that on locally. Obviously, there are costs associated, but, you know, I guess there's some confusion there about responsibility, and do you think more work should be done on that collaboration and maybe re-examining a division of who's responsible?
Thank you. That's a very good point and question. That's one of the issues that we struggle with, because we do have people that operate in a state park. State park's very small. They exit the park. They become subject to TWRA regulations. And so, you know, we'd have the potential for overlapping fees, overlapping regulations, and you know, then you've got to reconcile those. So there are some, we definitely need to, and then you've got counties and cities that are involved. We have people that are operating out of county park facilities and paying fees to the county as well. So it's very hard to, there's just no overarching entity that this is the first opportunity to really look at all of those challenges and overlaps, and I would hope that would be maybe what the TACIR could help address, is how do we do that? Because I think there's some access points that would be better managed by the counties, you know, with support, at least at the local level.
I'd like to reiterate on that also, in that across the state there's a potential for some lease agreements, and many times, county fire and rescue, or city county and fire and rescue, are the ones leading those rescue operations, and that costs money out of that community. Same holds true as what Mayor Biggers was saying, is that you have a site that needs some kind of attention drawn to it. And so I think maybe a possible solution going forward would be, in the development of these management plans, address who is responsible for what.
I would add to that, Mayor, that the proposal of the individual river management plans that I mentioned earlier is where you could meet that out. And I think Mr. Brown's exactly right. More collaboration is needed. There is, I mean, for paddlecraft, for people that use paddle boards and businesses that run on the reservoirs, there's a whole different fee structure than for people that are, where there is no fee structure on certain rivers and things like that. And I would add that on the Caney, the principal entities that are going to be, from a governmental standpoint, are the Corps of Engineers and TWRA. You go to the South Harpeth, it's going to be primarily TWRA and TDEC. So that's why the river-specific nature of those plans is important, because each situation is going to be a little bit different. And I think you could get to what is being mentioned here is that you could get around that complexity. Now, there may need to be some overarching, regulatory philosophy that's put out there to guide it. But I think that there's plenty of fertile ground to plow along those lines right now.
Yeah, I would.
Excuse me, if I can, I'm going to try to draw this to a close. Once you finish your answer, and then I think some of our members are going to need to leave soon. Got a couple of other items they might want to hear, so I'm sorry, Mary. Please continue briefly.
Sure. Yes, between city, county, Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Forest Service, state parks, TWRA, that's just off the top of my head. We've got a lot of competing regulatory agencies that are affecting these access points and these businesses. And they are being, and the fee structure that's in place on the Ocoee is not a fee structure anybody seems to be considering for the flatwater outfitters, but I think you probably want to treat people in the same business relatively similarly. That's another thing that needs to be studied. Jane is exactly right. The county swiftwater rescue squads, and I'll speak specifically about Bedford County on the Duck and Smith County on the Caney. Those are both volunteer rescue squads, and they have been hammered with calls and rescue operations, but they are not the only ones. There is no one keeping data on how many more 911 calls have come to county rescue squads across the state since this influx in users. But anecdotally, it's nuts, and they are unfunded. And the difference, and the reason I draw your attention to this, is that when the 911 calls come into a county rescue squad because of the nature of water emergencies, those people tend to go home alive. When that call is being given to a state agency, it's too late. By the time anybody gets there, it's too late. The county rescue squads are sending people home alive. So the fact that we have not considered them yet in any of this funding is a problem.
And Mr. Chairman, I just had a quick follow-up. Mr. Brown, in your presentation, you did not mention something that I thought was very interesting in your report. That is about the Texas sporting goods sales tax. If you don't mind just briefly talking about that, and do we have enough data? Because I'm hearing today we don't have enough data about who's actually on our rivers. Is it visitors? Is it mostly locals? I mean, I guess we have some idea. Do we have enough data to make a recommendation? Because I like that idea.
Texas takes the sales, it's about 6%, I think, 6.25% on outdoor recreation equipment that is not already subject to excise taxes under Dingell-Johnson, et cetera, and puts that into a fund for management of state parks and recreation opportunities broadly, and it generates a significant amount of money. Now, data-wise, I don't think, we don't know exactly how much that would generate, and it certainly would have to be determined, what products would be appropriate for that in Tennessee. The one thing I will say is, in one of the things we have suggested, if there's going to be additional fee on users, we're already paying almost 10% of gross. As you know, we have the highest sales tax rate in the nation. Yeah. And so that if we've got to pay an additional fee, we'd like to get a credit on the state portion of that sales tax, not the local option. We like supporting the local governments, but at least if we're going to, that's what happened on the Ocoee. They're paying 10% of gross to TDEC, but they're not paying sales tax currently.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think at this time I'll draw a conclusion to this very fine discussion. We have a lot of material to look at and look forward to the staff updates on this report. what we've learned today. And I'm going to call your attention to tab 7 at this time. And I thank our panelists. You well prepared, very eloquent comments today. Thank you very much. Very, very helpful. And as our panelists leave and resume their seats in the audience, then we will go to tab 7, electric vehicles and other issues affecting road and highway funding. An update from Bob Morio, our research manager. Where's Bob? Oh, I see Bob. Okay. But thank you again, as you panelists. Good job. If you're ready, Mr. Morio, let's get going.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Everyone can hear me. My name is Bob Morio, Research Manager, and I'll be first presenting a brief update to our study of electric vehicles and the issues affecting road and highway funding, the memo on tab 7 of your docket books. This study was initiated by the Commission in response to concerns raised during our January meeting that the increased adoption of EVs to replace gas and diesel-fueled vehicles would reduce state-shared fuel tax revenue that the state and local governments rely upon to build and maintain our roads. This topic has been in the news recently, was a topic of discussion during TDOT's budget hearings last month. And since our last update at the June meeting, there have been several announcements that vehicle manufacturers continue to invest in the production of new EVs. The biggest of these, of course, for Tennesseans is September's announcement that Ford will be developing its Blue Oval City campus at the Memphis Regional Mega Site, where the production of all-electric F-Series trucks will begin in 2025. This is being coupled with companies' plans for EV battery manufacturing nearby in our neighbor Kentucky. In August, TVA announced plans to convert its entire fleet of passenger cars and at least half of its own pickups and light cargo trucks to electric vehicles by 2030, which is approximately 1,200 vehicles of theirs. In October, there was an announcement nationally that the Hertz rental car company was ordering 100,000 Teslas for its fleet, which signifies a shift that EVs are expanding into the rental car market as well. There's no legislative directive or due date for this proposed study. Just a reminder that according to the approved research plan, I'll be returning to present some additional information and possible alternatives for discussion at our spring meeting. A draft report would be then presented in the fall, and final report for your approval in December of 2022, according to that schedule. So, if there are any comments, questions, discussion we want to have at this time, I'm happy to take that, or just follow up with me, between now and the next meeting, and we'll continue to work on this.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Mayor Bickers.
Just briefly, Mr. Murray, yesterday I read on CNBC News report that a survey of auto executives across the country, that the consensus now is that by 2030, 50% of all new vehicles sold will be EVs, which might be, just suggest you might include that, because if that is true, it's going to have a significant impact on how we fund our highways and roads.
Yeah, definitely. Keeping up with the projections of how fast this stuff is growing is going to be a big part of what we want to bring forward at the next meeting.
And Mr. Murray, in the June report update, and excuse my voice, it sounds worse than it feels. There was a line that said, we should not experience problems in Tennessee until we reach 100,000 electric vehicles. And that was questioned to me locally in East Tennessee about that number, because as Mayor Bickers indicated, it's clearly ramping up in a faster way. Can you speak to that?
Well, I think, if I remember correctly, I think one of the issues that when you start talking about the adoption of the electric vehicles is the time that, even if you're getting to where 50% of new vehicle sales are electric, you've still got the other half of vehicles that were gas and diesel fueled that are purchased that are going to last 10, 12, 15 years, and sort of the sales ramp up, and sort of there's still the legacy of all the vehicles we currently have on the road are sort of kind of continuing to buy fuel, continuing to pay taxes. Sort of it's a slow rolling kind of a thing. How quickly it starts to pick up is important but just there's still an awful lot of cars that we have right now that are still going to be on the road 10, 12 years from now in 2030 and 2040 that are going to be buying gas, and sort of managing the balance of the new ones, the old ones, the transition is really the important thing there.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Mayor Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob, do you have any idea, or the report come back and indicate how much each automobile person contributes through the sales tax currently towards the highway TDOT's funds?
As far as on the fuel tax?
Let me back up again. So at the pumps, we put in X amount of dollars, so much of that's tax for state revenue. And
right.
Do you have any idea how much that is currently per vehicle that utilizes our roadways in Tennessee? And if so, isn't that really a number that we have to look at of how to replace that dollar towards our roads? I'm not being real clear. I see the look in your eyes.
There was something that we had that I believe we had some breakdown of in the June in the stuff we put together for June, as far as some parts of the fuel tax go back to go to the state for the state highway fund. Some of it goes to local governments. It has gotten more complicated over the years. Every time we add another penny to the fuel tax, it's this penny is going to this, or this penny is half of it's going this way and half of it's going that way. One of the things that we did point out was that the additional registration fee on electric vehicles that's been added, the $100, as a registration fee, all goes to the state. It's not split up like fuel tax revenue was. So that was one of the issues that we pointed out, that if you're adding on additional registration fees, the way registration fees are distributed now is state funding, not the same as the fuel tax is done. So, but that's something that is being kept up with, and trying to. We have what's the typical mileage being driven? How many so how much money are people paying in fuel taxes? Is that balancing with what we're charging for other types of vehicles? Does that answer your question at all?
Mr. Chairman, as a follow-up, yes, I guess I'm interested from my level of leadership, how much at the local level is it going to cost us to continue on with funding? And I would think the legislators would be asking the same question, because if my memory serves me correct, I think the report, or somewhere I read, it's in the neighborhood of $1,200 to $1,400 in sales tax, revenue tax, that each vehicle, and that sounds high. But when you think about what a road costs, what a bridge costs, we just opened one Monday. Thank you, TDOT. It's called McAtcher.
Right.
It was $45 million for less than 2 miles worth of road. And that's not even taking into consideration the right-of-ways. And it's only taken 20 years. And, we better go ahead and get vehicles that fly pretty soon then. I'm finished.
Thank you. Mr. Clifton, you're recognized, sir.
Yeah, with regard to Mayor Anderson's question, I reference the recent budget presentation that Interim Commissioner Joe Galbato made, and I think he referenced a number of around $300 in local dollars, and that seems extremely low in comparison. But I think that presentation that he made does cover a lot of what you're referencing?
Yeah, I think we're going to be, see if we can get that stuff to add and talk to them,
Right.
Keep that going. Yeah, appreciate that.
Yes.
I would just add that to Mayor Anderson's question and Mr. Clifton's comments, these are exactly the kinds of things that this report is, that we're still in the process of chasing this kind of stuff to the ground, but these are the types of questions we hope to be able to answer once the report is complete.
And if I could, Mr. Chairman, just to thank you. Are you going to look at the aviation fuel tax also in this report?
Flying cars.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't.
No, not flying cars.
That wasn't part of the charge that the commission gave. This, just as a reminder, this study came out of a request from the commission. This wasn't from a legislative request. So it wasn't part of the original charge that you all gave us, but we do work for you. So if you want us to look at that as part of it, we could work that into the research plan, but it was not part of the original.
So again, if you don't mind, so are we taking just private passenger vehicles? Are we taking trucks? No.
No, we intend to include fleet vehicles in our analysis as well.
And this panelist that was here last, I mean, they're talking about a lot of. I know paddle boats don't have gasoline, but ski boats and all the things do. So is that part of the study? No.
No, it's not. It is not a comprehensive review of all sources of fuel and revenue from them. It is specifically looking at the issues related to potential effect of the ongoing shift from fossil-based fuel vehicles to electric vehicles on the maintenance, care, resourcing, et cetera, of roadways and related infrastructure in the state of Tennessee.
Thank you for that report, and I believe that takes us to tab 8, House Bill 1593, Senate Bill 1235, State Contracting in African American Owned Business, a draft report for review and comment today. Mr. Morio, you're recognized, sir.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Chairman. As you said, this report was prepared in response to House Bill 1593 by Representative Miller, Senate Bill 1235 by Senator Gilmore, and directs the Commission to study whether disparities exist in the issuance of state contracts to businesses owned and operated by African Americans, to provide information on the ways such disparities can affect the African American business community, and research efforts made to address disparities found in other states and local jurisdictions. The Commission is directed to report its findings and any recommendations to reduce disparities if they're found in Tennessee before January 31st, 2022. So we go back to 2007, the state commissioned a study to examine its procurement processes and determine if disparities exist for women and all minority-owned businesses trying to win contracts with the state of Tennessee. That report was published in 2009 and found that Tennessee had, quote, strong basis in evidence to take proactive measures to prevent discrimination based on race, ethnicity, or gender against women and minority prime contractors and subcontractors. It included a list of 23 recommendations to reduce disparities that it found, and in committee discussions of House Bill 1593 when it was introduced earlier this year, House Minority Leader Camper specifically wanted to know whether the state had attempted to implement those recommendations. So if you look at Table 3 on page 10 of the draft report, we put together a list of that study's recommendations, and through our research, we found that many of them have been incorporated to some degree into the state's current procurement policies, as Tennessee has consolidated much of its procurement authority under the Central Procurement Office and sought to improve its programs for minority-owned businesses in the 12 years since the 2009 study. But because the data on state contracts, as it's collected and maintained by the state's Central Procurement Office, is really managed with the state's overall procurement needs in mind, it's not tailored to serve as the kind of foundation required for these disparity studies. The state has not commissioned an additional updated disparity study since 2009, and TACIR staff found we really could not repeat the detailed statistical analysis of that 2009 study for this project yet. However, we do have a lot of data that was provided to TACIR staff by the Governor's Office of Diversity Business Enterprise, which I'll call GoDBE going forward, along with other available data included in the office's annual reports, which does allow for some analysis and comparisons to be made with the 2009 study. This data shows that states' procurement spending with African American-owned businesses has increased, both in total amount and as a percentage of overall state procurement spending, with that percentage growing from just 0.4% during those years reported in that 2009 study to 3.3% over the state's most recent 5 fiscal years, 2015-16 through 2019-20. And there's a table 2 shown on page 4 in the beginning of the draft report that compares those 2 5-year periods. But despite this overall increase, we find that agency-level spending goals for minority-owned businesses are not often being met. GoDBE works with each state agency to establish these annual goals for minority-owned business procurement, goals that are aspirational and carry no consequence for failing to meet them. And again, the state does not set agency goals specifically for African American-owned businesses or other individual minority groups. It's a minority business goal. GoDBE's data shows that half of the 30 agencies they work with failed to meet their goal in any of the 5 most recent fiscal years, and only 5 agencies have met their goals in at least 3 of the 5 fiscal years. Our further review of the spending data provided by GoDBE found that most of the state's procurement spending with African American-owned businesses specifically comes from 2 agencies, Department of Finance and Administration and TennCare, and that it's highly concentrated in certain areas, contracts for medical transportation, staffing, and some information technology categories. Appendix C at the back of the report shows that data that was provided to us and how procurement spending with African American-owned businesses breaks down by business category. So you really see that there's a lot of spending in a few areas near the top, and then it sort of kind of trickles down through a variety of different things in small amounts. The draft report calls attention to certain barriers that disproportionately affect African American-owned businesses' ability to compete for state contracts. Page 5 in the summary, the section that begins on page 22 in the body of the report, we explain the economically competitive disadvantage faced by African American business owners who typically have less access to capital, less wealth of their own to invest, and fewer family and personal business connections needed to help them grow. The report also describes existing state resources and programs that are available to small businesses, African American-owned businesses alike in Tennessee, which follows on page 6 in the summary and 27 in the body of the report. In addition to GoDBE, it mentions BERO, the Business Enterprise Resource Office within the Department of Economic Community Development, which is there to help really all new businesses start up and provide additional assistance. And then GoDBE coordinating the diversity business efforts for, again, all state agencies across all the state's procurements. The report explains how Tennessee's approach to procurement and assistance to small and minority-owned businesses has been one, it's race neutral, that government's authority to adopt race-conscious procurement policies is very limited under state and federal laws. Governments must document specific evidence of racial disparities and design programs to address those disparities in the narrowest way possible if they choose to do so in a race-conscious manner. And that's what these disparity studies are designed to do. The report notes that none of the 6 race and gender conscious policy recommendations that were made in the 2009 disparity study were adopted, despite the study's results likely providing the legal basis to enact them. Adopting new race-conscious procurement policies would not be feasible at this time without a full new disparity study and additional legislation, given that the data collected by CPO cannot on its own support that type of analysis needed to demonstrate whether racial disparities exist in state contracting. And even if a new disparity study found such racial disparities, stakeholders today might well disagree, again, whether to address them through race-conscious means. So the report concludes that there are incremental improvements to the state's race-neutral approach that can be made, and we suggest 2 recommendations to improve data collection and reporting of the disparity efforts across state agencies. The first recommendation says that if the state wants to update the 2009 disparity study, it would benefit from exploring cost-effective ways to enhance the procurement data collection process, better compare state procurement spending, specifically with the availability of different categories of businesses, including all groups, not limited to African American owned businesses, and to calculate those disparity ratios. Second recommendation says that GoDBE should publish in its annual report each state department's aspirational goals and achievements for business owned by minorities, women, persons with disabilities, and service-disabled veterans, all the categories that are covered under that office, as well as all small businesses. That this information could be published on GoDBE's website, and that GoDBE could possibly discuss sharing information with the staff of the Transparent Tennessee office, which serves as the executive branch clearinghouse for making state data more accessible. With that, I do look forward to presenting the final report in January. Welcome discussion. Happy to answer any questions at this time. Thank you.
In order to update or do a new disparity study, does that require legislation to do that?
Not to just have one. It's the previous study was commissioned by the GoDBE in 2007. It would be a funding issue of deciding to contract out and hire and figure out how to do
department? A funding issue for what department?
Well, it was General Services, Central Procurement, and that's where the Governor's Office of Diversity of Business is housed. So.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Anybody have a question? Senator Yarber.
Thank you. I mean, you said that it has to be contracted out. What kind of entity does that, and what's the budget item, budget number for something like that?
There's a handful of different firms around the country that do these. It's a small niche market. A few $100,000 upwards to $1 million. A lot of it depends on the cost, on how much data needs to be collected, how much work they have to put in. The 2007 study, they had hired temporary people to go through, individually all the state's contracts, a lot of stuff. It was pre-Edison back then, so there was a lot of legwork that was done. So it varies, but several $100,000 is common.
I have one more question. Have you or comment? If you haven't already, I'd encourage you to talk to the staff over at Fiscal Review. I know that I'm on that committee, and one of the requirements is that every contractor we must prove there's certain information provided to us, and one bit of information is whether the providers whose contract we're considering to approve is African American owned, and by an African American company, and this is just a summary. I haven't tallied it up, but very, very few are African American owned, almost statistically insignificant. So you might want. So there may be a body of data there that someone could look at and put into some type of a form.
Definitely.
I thought I'd pass that on.
Thank you. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? We thank you very much then for the report.
Thank you.
And look forward to hearing from you again on the subject. And I'll take us back now to the agenda, which I believe, is there any other business to bring to the group today? All right, there being none, we'll pass on. Then our next planning dates, there's some been thrown out here for us. Is there any objection to asking the director to do what he did for us last time, is just have staff poll us to see which one is a better meeting date? I thought that was a very good way to do it. If there be none, then we'll just look forward to hearing from your staff about it. We'll get that done. If folks would just keep, these dates in mind so we can keep them open as best you can. They'll be contacting you fairly quickly. Is there any other business that needs to come to the group today? I certainly appreciate each of you coming. We've had some very good panel discussions and at times some long panel discussions, and I appreciate your attention to all of them. And if there's no further business, we will adjourn.